I'm Scott Al Miller, and this is my life living in Nicaragua. Quite often, I get the question, why did we choose for my family to live in Nicaragua when we're so close to Costa Rica, which is so obviously a major choice and one of the most popular places for Americans, especially to expat, as my family are American? Well, it's a great question, and I'm always surprised by it, though, because to me, these are two of the most polar opposite places that you could reasonably consider within the zone, so it's hard to imagine why someone would be comparing the two. But if you're not used to the area, maybe it's not as obvious as to why you wouldn't put the two together. So let's talk about that and why you might consider one or the other right after the bump. Like I said, I'm always a little bit surprised that people will ask this question because if you're looking in the region, the factors that drive you to Nicaragua are generally very different than the factors that would drive you to Costa Rica. Nicaragua is generally put in a short list with countries like El Salvador and Guatemala, possibly Bolivia and Colombia, depending on how big of a region you're looking at. And nearly everyone gets lumped in with Mexico at some point because Mexico is such a big place that you can't pin it down to any one cultural or cost of living or set of factors that you might for other places. Small places like Nicaragua or Costa Rica have a tendency to be able to fairly or unfairly be pigeonholed a little bit because they're such small places that we can find some pretty strong commonalities throughout life within these countries. Whereas a Mexico or an Argentina is simply so large that you can basically come up with any range of possibilities within a country and population so large. But Costa Rica, on the other hand, is generally lumped in with countries like Panama or Belize, where you have a very different set of factors. So let's kick around what some of those factors are so you understand what you might be looking at. Now let's start with my experience. A lot of people watching my channel see a lot of it because we talk about Nicaragua all the time. So we generally talk about the factors that drive us here, primarily the cost of living. Once we're in the region, like let's just assume we're looking at the Western Hemisphere and within some reasonable reach of North America, right? So yes, southern Argentina might be really neat, but it's super cold and super far away. It's a different factor. And Europe and Southeast Asia have a lot of cool things. But when we're talking about we want to be in a similar time zone, we want to be able to get back to North America. We want Spanish as our language, probably, or an easy Latin or Germanic language that's easy to deal with. So we're looking at this basic region. So we'll lump in Belize and Latin America primarily. So we're looking for low cost of living, a place where we're going to be able to get more bang for our buck in our lifestyles, maybe get a little more pura vida, not have to work as many hours and not as hard, retire early, and so forth. So lower cost of living is a big deal, which could be cost of goods, how far our money goes, purchasing power parity, or tax advantages, right? All these things play in. Safety is, of course, a big one. I have young children, and it would be very nice if they stayed safe. And of course, my wife and I would like to be safe as well. So that's a big factor. Culture and society are big things. And then all the general things. And then there's a certain amount of just feel of a place that you go. That's a really big factor. But also really big for us, and this is less specific to a lot of people, but we really wanted to move away from North American culture. Not that we don't like North American culture, but we grew up in North America. We have that experience. That is something we bring with us wherever we go. So we don't need to be living in a place that has that. We have that. We're North Americans. My kids spent quite a bit of time in North America when they were younger. Their families in North America, they interact with North America. They're always going to have those connections, and they speak English very well. They don't need a place that's going to reinforce those things. One of our driving factors for becoming expats was that we wanted to give our children a worldview. And so any country that mimics that or copies things is not particularly beneficial to us. So that also ruled out Belize for us, partially because it's part of the Commonwealth, but also because it speaks English. So that was never a consideration, simply because we want our kids to have to be deep into another language, something that we didn't have when we were young. We want to be able to give them that so that they would have a little bit more access to the world as they got older. Now, Nicaragua, Salvador, and Guatemala generally fall into a short list because they share a lot of social factors. They are very close geographically, politically. They are relatively similar. There are certainly differences. Both Nicaragua and El Salvador are insanely safe. Now, at the time that we moved moved here. El Salvador was not super safe. Nicaragua has been very safe for a very long time. El Salvador, that is a relatively new thing. Guatemala definitely has its crime and violence problems, but they're relatively isolated, and you can easily live in Guatemala without having them be a major part of your life, but it's a little bit different in that way. But as far as cost of living, culture, and other aspects that we're really interested in, all of these countries make for really good considerations. And all of them are places that if I needed to live instead of Nicaragua, I would happily do so with no problem. So that tends to be a short list together. Now, sometimes people who are looking at those countries might also include Honduras, which has a lot similar as well, a little bit more problems with safety and a little bit less infrastructure, still a great country. There's a lot of Mexico that could fall into that. Panama sometimes is included because it has decent safety, not quite as good as Nicaragua and El Salvador, but it has some really nice connections to the world. And if you live in the right areas, you can get a lot of the lower cost of living as well. So Panama could be lumped in there. Colombia, popularly, if you're willing to go on to South America, shares a lot of overall aspects with this region, as does Bolivia, potentially Peru. Ecuador, traditionally, right now, it's been struggling, but it's coming back. But Ecuador falls into a slightly different zone, which we're going to talk about in a second. So that tends to be the short list on one side. We're not going to talk about the Southern Cone. It's just too far away. And even Bolivia starts to get pretty awfully far, right? So Colombia still sits relatively close. From here, you're only looking at like an hour and a half flight. And if you're looking from Costa Rica, even closer. Now, the other side of that, Costa Rica has a tendency to fall in with Panama and Belize and other parts of Mexico as being, and with generally with Ecuador, as being the place that primarily are driven by Americans looking to not get away from their culture. These are places that are outside U.S. jurisdiction technically, so they are under different laws. So generally, that means that there's some kind of tax advantage or cost of living advantage or a political advantage that you're looking to not be in the U.S. And that could just be some freedom or just some better retirement benefits, right? We've talked in other videos recently that simply being an expat gives you benefits even if there's no cultural differences or anything. There's tax advantages for Americans just by being outside your own country and other countries as well, but the U.S. is extremely advantageous to that very quickly and easily. So some people may look at Costa Rica simply because they want to stay in America but feel there's some advantages to being outside of it technically, and they want to leverage that. Now, I want to say Costa Rica is an amazing country, and one of the things that I love about living in Nicaragua is that we have such easy access to Costa Rica. So if you're like, but Costa Rica has, name the thing. Really great parks to go visit. Okay, but does someone living in Costa Rica have easier access to those parks than I do? They might be physically a little bit closer and not have to deal with crossing the border, but I have lower cost of living every day, and I can, on the rare occasions that I want to go visit that park in Costa Rica, do so incredibly easily. I don't need to hop a plane. I can just drive right down. Yeah, I got to cross the border, so a little bit of a pain, but depending on where you are in Costa Rica, I might be several hours closer to those places in Costa Rica than you are. So it's all relative. You have to consider that. And the same thing, Costa Ricans can easily access Nicaragua, but most of the benefits to Nicaragua happen when you live here, and most of the benefits to Costa Rica are in being able to visit it. So let's look at that a little bit. But it is great. And I have a great relationship with Costa Rica. I don't want to live there, but I do want to be able to visit. I think it's a great place to visit. Costa Rica doesn't need extra expats. They're not looking for me to move in. So we have a really symbiotic relationship. I visit and spend money and enjoy my time there and leave at the end of the day or at the end of the week or whatever. Costa Rica wants me to come in, spend some money, visit, enjoy the country, but ultimately they want me to go home. So we have a very good working relationship with each other. We're both doing exactly what the other wants. So everyone's happy, right? But let's talk about Costa Rica. Costa Rica is, more than I think anywhere else in the region, the de facto place that Americans go to when they don't do any research. This makes it the polar opposite in that way than Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, places that people only go to when they do a lot of research. So people who are moving to these countries up here in the CA4 generally are doing so because they've done a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, and they want something specific. And these places really meet a need that they're looking for. And often that is breaking from their traditional culture and going into something very new that happens to fit this profile, right? There's lots of places you can go that are very new. But so there's a very high success rate and happiness rate of expats who live in areas like Nicaragua, simply because anyone who's not going to like it generally is not going to have ever looked at it or will and rule it out after really thinking it through. They're not going to be coming here casually without knowing what they're doing. Normally, always an exception. Costa Rica is very much the opposite. Almost everyone who goes to Costa Rica does so because they didn't do their research. It's the highest cost in the region. It's the most dangerous place for tourists in the region. Those are major reasons to not be moving somewhere. That people go in droves regardless suggests that they are not at all paying attention to how things work in the region. They have no knowledge of the region, and they're going there despite having not done any research. And I've spoken to people I know personally who moved to Costa Rica, and even with all the access to resources that they have, being able to talk to me directly, having known me for years, they still move there. And their answer is it's the one place they had ever vacationed, and they would never consider looking at a second country or researching ever. Completely off the table, would never discuss it. They literally knew one village in one country and moved there, not thinking about the fact that what they had discovered was not being in the United States was the thing that they liked, and they never wanted to explore further. So you have the least research. And this is what you find over and over and over again in Costa Rica. You never find people who are expats in Nicaragua who don't know Costa Rica deeply, but you never or almost never find someone in Costa Rica who has any knowledge of Nicaragua. One is doing its research. This is where people end up. The other is doing research, and that's where people tend to avoid. Not that it's not a great country. It's a wonderful country with great people and great food and beautiful mountains, but it's full of expats who haven't done their research. And so not only is it a lot of expats, it's a lot of, quite often, the worst expats. Not that there aren't wonderful people who don't do their research and fall into a place and end up there, but it's not the norm. You're going to be surrounded by people who are not thinking broadly, who are not researching, who are not paying attention. Maybe they're just looking at the State Department website and not realizing that they're being manipulated and tricked and conned. And so you have what's generally a very unhappy and a very a poorly organized and poorly behaving group. Not that they're bad people, but it's not a group of people you want to self-select to be around in most cases. It's just, if you're going to be selecting a group, do you want people who've done their research and are happy and knowledgeable about where they ended up, or who just ended up in the place where they were sold? Right? That makes for a generally bad overall cultural experience. And the more that everyone does that, the worse it gets for everyone. And it drives up prices because people are never doing their research. And it causes risk like violent crime because it means people are not protecting themselves. They're not clued in. So they make themselves targets. And when your neighbors make themselves a target, they make you a target. So even when Costa Rica is great for you and you do all your research and it has all the things you want, those poorly educated and doing no research, falling into it expats are making things worse for you, and there's nothing you can really do about it. So that's something to be very aware of, that many of us specifically wouldn't go to Costa Rica having nothing to do with the country itself, but because of the culture of the expats there, it is completely off our radar. So if you're looking for that really authentic experience with a few expats, and the few expats that you do find are really intentionally there, places like Nicaragua, Guatemala, they're going to be great. If you're looking for the place where you have loads of expats who just went to wherever they saw an ad for, wherever their neighbor told them that they vacationed once, or they just did that vacation thing, they're on vacation, they know nothing of the world, this place is cool, so why would I research? They just imagine that the rest of the world is terrible, then you're going to want to go to Costa Rica or one of those places. Ecuador is also really big for that, right? So you have a completely different experience. So most of us who end up in places like the CA4, none of the places like Ecuador and Costa Rica would ever be on our radar. Just culturally, from the expat culture and the expat numbers, these are places we wouldn't consider. But the cost of living and safety factors are really big as well. So it really becomes interesting. I've never actually personally met a person who would consider both Nicaragua and Costa Rica. I've never met a person who chose Nicaragua that would ever consider Costa Rica. I've met many people in Costa Rica who are really interested in moving to Nicaragua or considering it once they find out it's there, but often they've lived in Costa Rica for years and literally don't know anything about Nicaragua to the north and are shocked to find out that it's an option, that it's safer, that it's cheaper. They had no idea, which tells us that they made the decision on Costa Rica without knowing about Costa Rica, because knowing about Costa Rica requires that you know about its neighboring countries. So if you didn't know Nicaragua, it means you didn't know what you got yourself into in Costa Rica and you went in blind. And that is one of the reasons why we tend to see a really high success rate for expats who come into the CA4. You know, again, we're ruling out the people who are the least likely to make it. So it's not like Nicaragua is so wonderful. I mean, I think it is, but it's not like Nicaragua is realistically so wonderful that no one comes here and then decides to leave. It's that the people who do decide to come here have self-selected into a very high success rate population. And the opposite in Costa Rica, which is why we see Americans specifically measured at giving up on trying to live in Costa Rica at 80% failure after just 2 years. That's way too short to give a place that you thought you were going to be staying in. Now, of course, I've seen people come to Nicaragua and I've seen them fail very quickly, and we've done case studies on them, but in each case, they came in with not the slightest clue of what they were getting into, never did basic research, the same kind of things that we constantly see in Costa Rica. So Costa Rican must see these kinds of failures constantly. However, that you tend to get a little bit more buffer. If you're coming into a place like Nicaragua, you tend to get hit with your harshest wake-up call in your first few days. Everything is structured so that you're hitting the wall as you come in. There's no big tourism industry. There isn't this huge handling of newbies. There isn't all these people speaking English to try to ease you into things. There's no infrastructure for that. You come in, and the hardest that you're going to have to deal with stuff is right at the beginning, which is a little bit intimidating, but it filters out the people who would come in way too casually. In Costa Rica, there's lots of structures for that. Well, we're going to put you in an enclave. People are going to speak English. We're going to serve you food you're used to, blah, blah, blah. Make it really, really easy to feel like you're on permanent vacation. And only once it starts being outrageously expensive do you start trying to ease into it a bit more. So you tend to have this really harsh learning curve at Nicaragua where it's harsh in the beginning and really quickly gets super easy. And in Costa Rica, you have this really easy at the beginning, and then relatively slowly you end up hitting a much harder overall wall. And so Costa Ricans, you tend to get a little bit more time before they fail, but the failure rate is much higher. Whereas Nicaragua, we do cut off quite a few people in those first few days, but once you've decided to stay, generally you're going to stay. It's very different places. So you can see from these things alone, it's hard to imagine which factors, other than they're both warm and in Latin America, but those are really broad factors, would cause someone to consider both Nicaragua and Costa Rica. So this is where I talk about people need to really make their list of what's important to them. What are you looking for? What are you picturing in your dream location that you're going to be moving to? Do you want to be around a lot of people who speak English and you want to pretend that you're still in the United States, but you want the benefits of the weather and stuff that we have here in this region? You want the benefits of being at least a little bit lower cost and maybe take that tax advantage of living outside the United States. And so if you want to be in that, I never felt like I left the United States. I have access to unlimited American style restaurants, or the selection of restaurants that I'm used to getting in the United States, right? Lots of different types or whatever. Then Costa Rica is going to be a really good choice for you. And there are some cooler cities up in the mountains. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So Costa Rica offers some cooler weather than we have here in Nicaragua, and it offers big urbane cities that we don't have here in Nicaragua. But those things are also offered throughout the CA4, so it's not like we don't have those in this region, in this short list. It's just that they're not here within the actual borders of Nicaragua. Now, of course, we do have Matagalpa, we do have Jinotega, we do have Esteli, which are a little bit in that direction, but not so dramatically. But I live out by the coast because my wife wanted to live near the ocean, which both Nicaragua and Costa Rica have, so that's not where one competes with the other. And then on the flip side, if you want that lower cost of living, you want that safer environment where you don't have to worry about violent crime, a little bit easier to raise your family, and more of the, and this is funny, but there's way more pura vida in Nicaragua than there is in Costa Rica, because in Costa Rica, you're dealing with prices and stress much more like the United States. You have all those expats and that expat drama that tends to come with it. So you have a lot of that North American negatives going on if you're going to be an expat in Costa Rica. Of course, if you're Costa Rican, you could do a lot to avoid that. But as an American, you can, but it's much more difficult. You're going through a lot of effort to try to recreate Nicaragua in Costa Rica instead of just coming to Nicaragua and just having it be easy. So if you're looking for that more laid back, more relaxed, more natural lifestyle where you're spending less money, not having to deal with so many expats and the drama, and you want that culture of being more laid back, Nicaragua is going to serve you much better very, very easily. And that it's safer, it's just a slam dunk if those are the things that matter to you. Everyone has a different set of things. So it's not that it's shocking that people select Costa Rica. That's not surprising at all. And there has to be places that are the default choices. There has to be the place that installs Windows on your laptop, right? Somebody has to have a default choice. Is Windows right for you? It's right for almost nobody. Working in IT, Windows is the worst thing to have as a default. It's almost no business or no person benefits from having Windows. Most people suffer dramatically because of it. It's the only one that requires antivirus. It's the only one with major security holes. It's the only one that has unreliable updates, right? Now, Mac is not necessarily the answer. That's what everybody jumps to. They always pick one thing and say, well, it's not as good as that for this one specific thing. That's true. That's not the main alternative, but we're not going to go into that. But the point being, there's always a default for people who aren't doing their research and just take whatever the salespeople are going to throw at them. And salespeople are going to take advantage of you 99% of the time. There's more money to be made moving you into Costa Rica than there is other places, right? If you're a person with a channel like mine and I wanted to make some money off of you, I would make so much more money by doing so in Costa Rica. I can sell you property at much higher rates. What's $100,000 here is $1 million in Costa Rica. My 5% cut, my 10% cut is going to go way farther in Costa Rica. The ability to get people to watch my channel way better in Costa Rica. I wouldn't have 12,000 viewers. I'd have 30,000 viewers just by switching countries, right? Those little things, way beneficial for me. So if I wanted to take advantage, like so many do, be a salesperson and try to sell you on something, Costa Rica is what I would want to sell you because it's the easiest thing to sell. And the US and Canadian governments are willing to put out lots of things saying that it's a great place to go. And they put in big effort trying to discourage you from places like this that are actually safe because they need you to go to places that aren't too cheap. They need you to go to places that aren't too safe so they can say, look, it's better back home. You should have listened and stayed, right? But if you come to Nicaragua, then you're like, wow, it's so much cheaper. Wow, it's so much safer. Why is it cheaper and safer? How are they able to do that, right? You start to question things. They don't want you to question things. They want you to go to Costa Rica and learn your lesson. So that's how they push you, right? And for obvious reasons. This doesn't require like some big conspiracy theory. This is just basic logic of how would you design a State Department website to push people where they learn their lessons or go where you can get tax revenue back to the US or support partners or whatever. That's how you're going to do it. That's its purpose, right? Is not to help you, it's to help the government. So that's what it's doing in a very obvious way. So of course we need that, right? But coming up here, you have all these other advantages. So there's lots of great reasons to go to Costa Rica, and it's a wonderful country. But there's lots of great reasons to go somewhere else. So defining what matters to you will help you understand what your short list should look like, right? And if you come up with a short list that actually includes both Costa Rica and Nicaragua on the same short list, definitely share it and explain share that list with me and put it in the notes. I want to know how those two could ever show up together on anybody's list, unless it's a list of like, I'm willing to live anywhere in Latin America. I want to try it all. Okay, that's not a short list. That's 17 countries. It's too many. Short list is like 4 countries, right? So make your short list. So this is the exercise for everybody. Write down the factors that really matter to you. And the obvious ones, right? Cost of living and safety are really major, but they don't apply to everyone. Language spoken. Some people are just, I want English or I want a lot of English. Those are important factors, right? And some people like us, I want very little English or none. None would be stretching. But very little is really good. And so that was a factor for us. For a lot of people just don't care. It's fine either way. Right? You can get by. I can go to places that have 0 English and get by, and I can go to places that are all English and obviously get by, but I don't want that. I want something that's going to force me to learn a language. You guys see my Duolingo stuff going up all the time. That's important to me. It's not important to too many people. So that's, things like that. Figure out what matters. You need access to the ocean. You can have lots of things that are very common, but if access to the ocean is super important, that's going to rule out Bolivia for you. You may not realize it's going to rule out Paraguay for you. Some places that are otherwise very nice, but maybe you want to be in the mountains, and that's going to rule out Nicaragua for you. I mean, we got kind of mountains. We want to really be in the mountains. That's going to rule us out. That's going to make Bolivia very, very plausible. It's a great place for mountain living, like absolutely excellent. So those things will go a long way. So I want to see those short lists. I want to know what you guys have. And those are some great discussions. Let's make some short lists and talk about the things that matter to you. And just as a general discussion, I'd love to break some of those down in videos. That'd be fun. So I said I was going to talk about, so Costa Rica, one of the reasons that Chris had mentioned, I think it was Chris, now I don't have it in front of me, that you can go up to the mountains and live in San Jose in Costa Rica. And if I was going to live in Costa Rica, I almost certainly would live in San Jose. I think it's a really nice large city. It does have some violent crime problems, but they've cleaned some of that up, so it's way better than when I first went there for sure. I love some of its downtown. It's got some beautiful neighborhoods that I really like, lots of great food, decent shopping, easy access to things, and a wonderful airport. So lots of reasons why San Jose would be a reasonable option. And there was a time where I thought I was taking a job. I was very close to taking a job in San Jose, and we were going to move the family there. So we considered it very heavily and did a lot of research. Now that was because of work. We no point where we were like, this is the right city for us, but we were like, oh, almost fell over. With the right job, this would be a great place to be based. And so that almost happened at one point. But if you're looking for those mountainous cities with cool weather and lots to do, you actually get, like, Guatemala City does what San Jose does, but better. You have bigger neighborhoods that are far safer. You have more restaurants. You have more, just basically all the things that you tend to like in San Jose, you get more of in Guatemala City, while safer at a fraction of the price. Guatemala City is much closer to Nicaragua in prices than to Costa Rica in prices, plus culture and all those things lean towards Nicaragua. So if it's the factors that lead you to Costa Rica also make you want to live in the mountains in a big city, then San Jose is going to be perfect for you. But if you like all the factors of Nicaragua, but you want a cold city up in the mountains, you're probably going to go to Guatemala or possibly San Salvador, which is kind of an in-between. That's why making those lists and understanding those factors is so important. Otherwise, it's easy to get distracted by mountains in large city when those are things that are shared across both regions. So if you were looking at standard shortlist, Panama, Costa Rica, Belize as one group, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala as another, and then list specific things that are shared between the two, then you can make the list make sense by looking at the things that are significantly different that really make them define as different places. So this was kind of my breakdown. A lot of people ask about this. It's very common to before you're doing deep research to look at these countries and go, well, they're right next to each other. And I keep hearing people talk about Costa Rica, but remember, anyone you hear talking about Costa Rica, it is essentially guaranteed. And I truly mean this. It is all but guaranteed that either they've done no research and are pushing Costa Rica because it's the only thing they know, or they feel trapped in Costa Rica, maybe because they've invested a lot of time, or they've put in a lot of money, or they feel embarrassed because they chose it without knowing, and now they're trying to make some money off of that, or such as they're trying to sell property or tours or whatever, or they have a business there and that's what they're trying to promote. So look carefully as to why someone might be promoting Costa Rica. And I think the biggest thing is, and this is difficult to tell from abroad, but those of us who live up here, remember, we all can move to Costa Rica pretty easily. And we don't, right? There's no big southern movement of expats from Nicaragua to Costa Rica, but there is a big movement of expats from Costa Rica to Nicaragua. It's all one way because you come into one without knowing, and once you learn, you shift to the other if this is the region you want to be in. And clearly not everyone shifts. For a ton of people, possibly the majority of expats, being around other English-speaking expats and isolating yourself from local culture is the driving factor in deciding where they want to go. Costa Rica is going to dominate Nicaragua in that area. So it makes sense that they have so many expats because they offer that in a way that is better than anywhere else in the region, possibly anywhere else in North America. There's probably bits of Mexico that beat them at that, but I don't know where it would be to actually have a large region that is that dramatic. So Costa Rica may be the leader in this in all of Latin America. So it completely makes sense. But if you're watching my channel, there's a really high chance that you're more interested in the culture and the safety and the low cost of living and other factors that would make Costa Rica probably one of the last places on your list. And like, I want to be clear. I love Costa Rica. It's a wonderful country with wonderful people and a nice government. And like, everything's great. There's no actual negatives from the country. But if you were to give me a short list of 17 Latin American countries, which is all of them, it is most likely, now I've not put in detailed time into every single country, but given the things that I know, which is more than most people about Latin America, Nicaragua is my #1 choice, and Costa Rica is quite literally my number 17 choice to live in. Lots of great reasons to vacation there, lots of reasons to visit. It's just it doesn't offer any of the things that would make me want to live there. Now, would I live there before I lived in much of Europe? Yes. Would I live there before I lived in lots of Southeast Asia or Africa? Yes. I love Latin America, so this is the right region for me for a lot of reasons, and Costa Rica doesn't somehow violate Latin America and make it not a great option. It's just most likely the last place or nearly the last place, or it's really towards the bottom one way or another, of a really long list. And Nicaragua is clearly, because I'm here, my #1 choice. So to me, I view it as quite literally, the polar ends of a spectrum that the factors that most people decide along. Right? Everyone has their different factors. So somebody, they're going to be close. But for most people that I know becoming expats, these two are the most dissimilar within the region. So seeing someone question them together always catches me by surprise, and I'm always interested in what factors would make these two ever come up on your list together. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help to support the channel, you got that Buy Me a Coffee link up above. Hit that and you can buy me a coffee like on Patreon. And if you go right down there, there's a join button for those who want to be members of the channel. Just $5 a month really helps make this channel possible. It takes a lot to do this. If you watch another video, that would be fantastic. It tells the algorithm that you love the show. And of course, like I said, get down there, leave your short list. Tell me what factors matter to you for moving. Where are you considering? What should we dive into? I'd love to break some of these down on a show. And of course, there's instructions in the show notes on how to reach me should you need to. And because people ask, and I'm like, it's in the show notes, and how to send in a video comment or question so we can add you with your face and stuff onto the show. That would be fantastic. I'll see you all tomorrow.